This podcast is for information purposes only and is not and should not be construed as professional advice or an offer or commitment by any Rabobank Group member to enter into a transaction. The views expressed by the presenter and or guests are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of Rabobank. Please see the podcast description for our full disclaimer. How often do we hear, well, it's what the market is demanding when it comes to proving the sustainability credentials of New Zealand's agricultural products? But is that really the case? And if so, which markets? And what exactly do they want? And why? I'm your host, Blake Holgate. And today I'm joined by Agri HQ's very experienced and highly respected journalist, Neal Wallace, who recently spent 6 weeks visiting 7 countries to get the answers to these exact questions. And full disclosure, Rabobank, Fern Farms, Alliance, Beef+Lamb New Zealand and the Meat Industry Association helped to fund Neal's trip because, well, we also want to know the answers to these questions. So, Neal, welcome to Growing Our Future podcast.
Yeah, hello, Blake.
Look, now, we've known each other for a number of years now. Normally the shoe's on the other foot, though, and it's you asking me the questions, so quite looking forward to the opportunity to ask you the questions this time, Neal. But do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your career to date?
Yeah, well, I'm a bit of an old school journalist. I've been in the job 41 years. Over half of that has been involved in agriculture. I keep saying agriculture is my security blanket. I keep coming back to it, but I love agriculture. I respect it. I just know how important it is to our economy and to society and to our to the whole nutritional balance of our diets, etc. So I keep coming back to it. I've worked in daily newspapers, but for the last 7 or 8 years, I've worked for the Farmers Weekly.
Excellent. So as I said at the start, you recently visited 7 countries in 6 weeks, so quite an itinerary. Do you want to give us a quick overview of where did you go specifically and what was the real purpose behind the trip?
Well, I'll start with the latter first. I was approached by one of our major exporters and they, as you alluded to, they wanted the answers to those very same questions. You hear these, what markets want and what do they want and why. And I think the other part of it is that, Fonterra's put out its Scope 2 and 3 emission targets. I know Alliance and Silver Fern they're going to be doing that shortly. So I think it's all part of that whole equation, that this is why they're putting up those Scope 2 and 3 emission targets, which will directly affect farmers. So they wanted to hear from the market. So I visited Los Angeles, Chicago, Brussels, Utrecht, which is Rabobank's head office, Amsterdam, Paris, London, Dubai, and Shanghai, and spoke to customers. I spoke to people in those markets, experts, and tried to answer most of those questions. I looked at a couple of other issues as well. I looked at trade and how the growing nationalism is going to affect trade in the future. And I also looked at some of the market strength, what's happening in the markets, in particularly our key markets like the UK and US and Shanghai.
And I know given such a wide range of stakeholders and markets you went into, there's a whole range of insights that you would have generated and as you were going along, you were reporting through Farmers Weekly and other channels. For the purpose of this podcast, I'd be really keen to understand what you see as the key takeaways or findings from your trip. If you put your farmer grower hat on, what would be the key takeaways, key messages, high level, that you would like to really get across to them?
Yeah, I think the main message was two or three really stick out, and I think the main message is that New Zealand farmers have done all the hard work when it comes to sustainability. And we're only talking generally here because there's people at either end of the spectrum. But in general, farmers have done the hard work. They are sustainable. And that was recognised by, I spoke to McDonald's, Nestlé, Mars, and they've freely acknowledged that New Zealand farmers have done the hard work. They have some of the most efficient production systems in the world, and they're doing a blooming great job. What they want is to have that quantified, and they want to see continuous improvement. That our emissions and our efficiency now is only going to get better next year and the year after and the year after, and they want that quantified. So I think that's that was really the key message I got back. But I don't think farmers really fully acknowledge. Well, they say it, but I don't know if they really understand what that means. And I think the other message is that New Zealand farmers need to have an international perspective. They need to realise that when the lambs go on the truck and go off to the meat plant this afternoon, or when that tanker load of milk goes away tonight, that's only part of the job that they're involved with. That there's consumers in Chicago and London and Shanghai and who are looking at that product and thinking, how was this produced? Does this meet my values? So I think New Zealand farmers need to have a very more of an international perspective, and it's easy not to have when you've got to go and fix the fence out the back, or you spend the whole day with your bent over dagging lamb. So I understand that, but I think it needs to be built into their psyche. The two other things I really picked up on, that New Zealand loves and it wants our meat and dairy protein. They really do. They respect it. It has all those boxes, ticks all those boxes, taste, nutrition, all those sorts of things. They really want it. Unfortunately, lamb is incredibly expensive, and really I don't think they're struggling to pay for it, really. So they're really the main messages I came back with the exception of one, and that is to get this, to prove to our consumers, our customers, that we are sustainable. We need to have an easy process that ticks all, so farmers can tick the boxes that they've met animal health, they've met climate change emission targets, they've met land and water sustainability and all those sorts of issues. This is quite demanding, and we can't expect farmers to do one report for the regional council, one report for Osprey, one report for MPI, one report for Fonterra, one report for Alliance, one report. We just can't expect that. And my challenge, and I've been saying I'm going to say it for as long as I can, is that New Zealand Inc. needs to come up with a simple process that every farmer can spend one night every month or every 2 months, quickly fill it in, half an hour, bang, it's off, and it satisfies all these departments. So that's my challenge to New Zealand Inc.
Yeah, and you're probably not going to get too many arguments from our listeners on that one, Neal. Interested from the other side though, is that what our markets and customers would also value? Are they saying, look, if you guys can come up with a standard that's kind of all-encompassing, all-embracing, and we might have little bits and pieces that are different, that would make our job easier? Or are they, from their perspective, going away and sort of developing their own accreditation standards and procedures?
They're certainly putting out there what they want and what they expect. McDonald's, for example, raised the issue of bobby calves. They want an answer to that. They don't, it doesn't resonate well with them. So they're certainly putting up the expectations. The only proviso that I really came back with was that it has to be government guaranteed. It has to have a government authenticity behind it. Sure, Fern, Fonterra, whoever is important. Having their approval is important, but they want it backed by government standards, if you like, which I suppose is exactly the same as like meat industry or the dairy quality industry, isn't it, where you get government employees going in and checking it off. So that was really the only proviso that I came back with, other than that they'll have a list of things they want checked off.
So I suppose the answer to the initial question, does the market want it? From what you're saying, yes, they do. What do they want? Well, they want evidence of what's being done. In your travels, Neal, was that consistent across? Because you covered Americas, Europe, Asia, Middle East. Was that consistent and even across those different regions, or are different regions at different stages in that journey, and therefore wanting maybe slightly different things at this stage? Yeah,
I'd say I didn't really see a lot in the Middle East. It was only in Dubai. That was more of a meeting a market type scenario, but certainly China, Europe is huge. It's massive in Europe. And we can talk about that later, more about that later. But and the UK as well. But Europe tends to set the standard, and others tend to follow, and they're well down this path of verification, if you like.
And what about the US? Because I agree. You tend to get the impression that a lot of this is driven or led from Europe, but really interested in your perspective on where the US market would fit into that continuum.
The US is really interesting because Mars, for example, which you'll be aware is a very, 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 very large company, its sustainability drivers are coming from the Mars family, who are not short of a dollar, but they're setting a lot of these standards and driving the company to follow these sustainability attributes. McDonald's, it's coming from within, but it's coming from both. It's coming from their customers. Fonterra was telling me that the work they're doing to try and improve, to this authenticity is quite not time consuming, but it's a major workload for them, and it's been driven by consumers and by the companies themselves. So, whereas Europe, it's more of a government type initiative. They've got the Green Deal in Europe, which you might be aware of, and that's driving a lot of their sustainability movement, if you like.
Yeah, which is an interesting point because, we talk about markets from a regional geographic perspective, but maybe a more appropriate way is to look at, those major buyers or supply chains, and you mentioned Mars, so we'll go with that. Presumably they're going to have a universal standard that they'll want their products to meet. They can't sort of put a one level of quality sustainability product into a region like the US, then a different one into Europe, right? Because they're going to be judged on where the floor is across their range. So in some ways, perhaps it comes less relevant from a geographic regional point of view, and it's more actually what are these major markets from a buyer's perspective demanding?
Yeah, well, McDonald's, for example, are now taking beef out of the Amazon, beef farms out of the Amazon, and who would have thought that? And they've been doing that for quite a number of years, and they've set standards that the beef producers have to meet, and if they can meet that, they'll take it. So, yeah, it's very much a universal approach now, and as I say, I think that beef example was really shook me when he told me about it. But that's what the market wants, and so you can supply what the market wants. We'll take it.
And you've already touched on this question, but we'll go back to it. How well positioned do you think New Zealand farmers and growers are to trade into that environment?
They're right up there. They've done all the hard work, and but the next challenge is to quantify it and quantify it in a efficient, enabling way. So, as I say, we're well recognised. They totally acknowledge our efficiency as producers. But as I say, we've just got to get farmers on board to quantify that and show continuous improvement.
So it's more at this stage around quantification and evidence than perhaps improvement or change. And you've alluded to continuous improvement, but the first step into continuous improvement is understanding and demonstrating where you're starting from. So perhaps that is the first step.
Exactly, and that's why I'm issuing the challenge that all the bodies that are involved in this need to get around the table and need to come up with something quite quickly. I know Damien O'Connor tried that when he was minister. It obviously didn't work for whatever reason, but it's just so important that we do this because others are catching up very quickly. I am a related issue. I just looked in NZ, the Agri-Zero NZ annual report, and Bovia, for example, is now being used in 167 countries, and they're now claiming to be sustainable, be more sustainable for climate change, for greenhouse gas emissions than New Zealand, and that's really serious. If they can get their milk powder into some of these top markets by claiming to be lower carbon emissions than us, that's really serious.
Yeah, and again, that's going to be my next question. We live in a competitive environment. How is this impacting our competitors, and what approach are they taking? And what role does the technology and innovation, how much emphasis and focus are our competitors putting into that space?
Yeah, I'll talk about Europe in that respect because you've got the European Green Deal, and that's going to restrict issues like use of fertiliser, stock numbers, etc. In Holland, for example, they reckon that there could be a 15% reduction in cow numbers over the whole of Europe. So they're sort of taking trying to reduce the impact of livestock on the environment. That's been driven by the European Union. Denmark's going to start charging for agriculture emissions in the next few years, and they're putting money into issues to try and find solutions to reduce those emissions. So that's one angle. So a lot of their stuff has been driven by the government. I spoke to one of your colleagues, one of your Rabobank colleagues, and he made the point that Europe has been very good at using technology to increase its food production. And he's saying, well, we're not actually you're looking at technology to reduce the environmental impact. We're just cutting back numbers. So it is a real issue over there, a real concern about what it's going to mean to food production, and but it could mean to more imports from countries like us. So yeah, technology doesn't seem to be that great. The government seems to be more inclined to try and reduce the pressure on the environment as opposed to using new technology.
And you alluded to it, Neal, but does that become one of the potential upsides and opportunities for New Zealand as all growers and producers, not just New Zealand growers and producers, are required to focus more on the sustainability aspects of their performance? I suppose, cut to the chase, does the potential constraint of supply, will that create in itself some potential benefit?
Yeah, because what I was told was that demand is still there. It's as great as it's ever been. It's actually growing for dairy in particular. The US in particular love protein, and they're putting it in all sorts of things like potato chips and biscuits and etc. to try and increase the protein intake. So, I think it must lead to more opportunities. And certainly going to potentially lead to higher prices if there's less food around, as happened in Europe and in the Netherlands, where they had a campaign about the growth using growth hormones in chickens. The supermarket stopped that, and the price of chicken rose. So I mean, supply demand.
And it's interesting you say the demand's still there, because one of the aspects of this whole change around how and what food is produced is the focus around, from some quarters, around getting consumers to change their behaviours, more plant-based diets, for example, and reducing meat and protein intake. How much of that came through on your trip?
I did. It was perhaps an oversight. I should have looked into it a bit more, but the few comments I had was that it's not an issue yet, but it could be. That consumers are not taken with it. The taste and the texture doesn't compare with the real product. And there's also a real concern, or a real consumer preference for natural product as opposed to heavily processed products. So it's not an issue yet, but that's not to say it won't be in the future.
Okay, talking about the future, based on what you saw and heard, what do you think will be demanded or required by those markets in 5 years' time? You mentioned, the demand now is, okay, New Zealand, you're pretty good at this stuff, but we need to start to see some evidence of that. If you tried to sort of look 5 years into the future, I know it's always tricky in this space, but what any thoughts on what it looks like in 5 years' time?
Yeah, I think, by 2030, Mars and Nestlé, for example, want to halve their emissions. So I think this train coming down the tracks will be, as we've talked about earlier, Blake, quantifying our emissions and our continuous improvement. I think that's going to be very real, because these companies, they're big entities, and they make these statements, and they're not going to back down from them very easily. So I think that's certainly going to happen. I can't see demand for dairy easing at all. I think it's going to grow. I think we've got a bit of a problem with lamb because of its cost, and in the UK in particular, which is, you're well aware, is a huge market for us. The Sunday roast, which is sort of the staple use of our lamb in the UK, is not carrying, doesn't have favour with the younger generation. It's more of an older generation type of dish, and it's really impressive to see Alliance have got a kitchen in their office in London, and they've got a chef, and they're trying to develop new products, kofkas and burgers, and they're trying to get. They're at Tottenham Hotspur home ground. They're catering meat to that home ground, so they're trying to find new customers, new generation of customers, which is really great to see. But the issue, of course, every time you touch a piece of lamb to do something with it, it adds to the cost, and it's already high cost. But good on Alliance for trying it, because I think that's something we've got to do. We've got to do something to find new customers, and particularly in the UK.
So status quo, BAU probably won't cut it going into the future. No,
I don't think so, because those Sunday roasts are just a staple. But I know, and still Fern, to their credit, are also looking at trying to develop new markets and new products, and they're just going about it through their wholesalers, as opposed to directly like Alliance are doing.
Now, most, if not all of that, is outside the direct control, at least, of farmers and growers. Again, based on your insights and what you saw and heard, Neal, what should New Zealand farmers and growers be considering, thinking about, if they're wanting to sort of put themselves in the best space now to be really profitable and performing well into that future state that we've been talking about?
A few weeks into the trip, I started thinking I'm not going to be very popular when I get back home with some of the messages I'm giving. But the reality is, they need to start looking at their whole business as if the international spotlight's on it. That McDonald's and Mars and Nestlé's and Sainsbury's and Tesco's of this world are looking at that farm and what's going on, because effectively that's what I think is going to happen. That as we've talked about, quantifying your emissions and your management, and looking at things like significant natural areas or biodiversity, all the water quality, how you manage water, what you use water for, all those things that we've seen with New Zealand Farm Assurance. So that type of recording, I think they all need to start thinking about that, and as I say, have that international perspective. Think that Tesco's is looking over the fence, or Sainsbury's is looking over the fence at what you're doing, because we're selling into an international market with an international products. So, I think it's obvious that those customers want to know what's going on, and I think farmers need to start thinking about that, and just how they are perceived and how the management's viewed.
Yeah, so regardless of what you think of those market demands and the drivers behind them, and why it's being done, and who's driving it at the end of the day, the customer is the customer, and you've got to deliver what they want, regardless of why they want it, I suppose, is the message there. Neal?
And also be aware that other countries are also making improvements and are taking this seriously. As I alluded to earlier, taking beef out of the Amazon. The Australians are obviously growing, becoming increasingly competitive, and they'll be doing this now, the same things, having the same requirements put on them, and they'll be meeting them. So, we need that international perspective.
You mentioned earlier on, a couple of times about sort of, standardisation of accreditation and ways of demonstrating the good work that we're doing. But there are existing schemes out there already, right? So we know of, the Farm Assurance and Farm Assurance Plus program, the red meat sector, and the various dairy companies will all have their own individual programs, what is, I suppose, what is more required of those, or what role do they play? Is it a case of having to add on to those, or is it something around going that the problem is actually too many of them, and it's how do we bring them together? Where do we go from the current state, what we've got with programs and accreditation schemes, to what you're saying we need to get to?
Well, I know we had 11 calculators to calculate farm emissions, didn't we? So that seems to be about 10 too many. It's something I am actually looking into in the next couple of weeks, but I think there's obviously some material out there, or some programs out there that that surely we can get some intelligent people around a table and say, "Oh, this matches," and mix and match, so we come up with one template. It is, it is going to be quite extensive. It's your use of water, soil, biodiversity, climate change, rather emissions, your management and use of chemicals, use of all those things. So it is quite extensive. But if you're supplying Fonterra or some of the meat companies, you must probably be doing a lot of that already. You've got withholding periods, and you've got your use of chemicals and etc. All it's all recorded. I would have thought, and I am quite naive in this, I'll concede that, but that there's a lot of material out there. It's just a matter of standardising it and plucking one from. Plucking it from wherever it's needed and blending it into one usable document. And
again, you mentioned, Neal, the challenge is it is quite extensive, right? Because there's so many aspects to sustainability. Did you get a feel from what some of the key ones are? And I don't want to drive you towards a certain direction, but I imagine, for example, greenhouse gases and climate's a pretty fundamental one, right?
Yep. Yes, it was. And animal welfare was another. I was quite surprised at, and I must say here too, Blake, Nestlé, Mars, Wrigley, they were very open. They didn't hold back, and there was no pretense about what they were telling me. They were very, very open about what they wanted to tell me. And I was quite surprised at how the level of concern about our use of bobby calves, or how we treat bobby calves at McDonald's was. That was very, he made it plain to me that that's something we need to sort out. So that was quite a surprise. But climate change emissions are the big ones. It's a big one. Water and soil is big over in Europe. Bigger. I got the impression was bigger in Europe than it is here. And so that social responsibility didn't really appear too much, but it was certainly there. But animal welfare and greenhouse gases were the big ones.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you think from a strategic point of view, if we use that bobby calf example, just because the current state means it's acceptable, doesn't always mean the future state will be. And to me, that's, when you're thinking about strategic planning, because they're also not the kind of thing you can just turn the tap off. It doesn't, with farm systems, that doesn't change in 12 months, but it can over, say, a 5-year horizon. So I suppose as an individual farmer, as a business, you've got the opportunity to make the strategic choice and go, look, I'm concerned about the strategic risk I've got here in bobby calves going forward. I want to reduce exposure or manage or mitigate it, or maybe not. Maybe you go, look, my take is I don't think it's going to be as big an issue as maybe some are making it. That's an individual choice, but I suppose it's about being aware and making conscious choices around within your business where are the areas of risk that you're exposed to.
And they recognise that. They're not expecting us to change next week, and they aren't leaving us stranded. They're prepared to work with us. I know they're working with Nestlé and some of these companies working with Nestlé and Fonterra, for example, and planting waterways and riparian planting, etc. And I know Nestlé, for example, they've got their science team working on methane inhibitors. So they, as you say, they acknowledge that it's not a quick fix to change a farm system, but it's showing that we are making those changes is really, really important.
Excellent. Any other key takeaways or messages you wanted to leave, Neal, before we wrap it up?
I just that really I was heartened by just how we were accepted and just how open they were. They really wanted to talk to me. Really happy to talk to me and send that message back. And we really aren't being left alone, or do or die. It's not up. That we've got support and they're happy to help work with us. So it was, and just on a personal note, it was you don't often get an opportunity like this in anyone's career, and I'm incredibly grateful and acknowledge how privileged I am to have had this opportunity. It was the chance of a lifetime to go and do this work, and I hope farmers don't think they're being got at, because that's definitely not the case. It's as you say, these things change and evolve over time. This is just another part of that evolution, and we're going to have to we're halfway there. We just got to do a bit more, and we can just continue our privileged position.
Excellent. At the end of the day, your role is to bring information back to New Zealand farmers and growers to enable them to make informed choices within their own business, and that's their prerogative right. And very much encourage people to take on board and then make decisions that are in the best interest of their own business. So look, thank you, Neal, for doing the research. I know you said it was a great honour and privilege, but I suspect it's a lot of hard work too. I saw the number of stories that you were pumping out, and those don't happen. And thank you for being very open with your time as you've got back to share those insights across with everyone.
It's my privilege. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Neal.